time to get serious again, and hope some of you at least got to warm up and actually enjoyed your free lunch. Someone said there wasn't such a thing, but there was today, so yay. So now it's fine to keep on eating, but we have a very special opportunity, and it's to hear from a group of people in ages that are not represented anywhere else here. Anyway, we will move on now. Here we go. So we are going to start to have, I guess, kind of a dialogue, discussion between Sitarani Crevier, is that right? Who is the Senior Director at the Bennet Group Strategic Communications, which is a group that's been helping us a lot in the last few months, and we're very grateful to. And a group of young adults we at MADD call our ambassadors. Now, they have named this segment of the program that's coming up the Inspiring Youth Engagement Panel. So I don't think there's anything more I can say about that, except enjoy the youth and get inspired. Carry on.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sitarani Crevier, and it's an honor to be here to facilitate the panel with our young adults to talk about how to reach and engage their demographic. Because what we're talking about today is about changing the attitudes and the perceptions of people between the ages of 16 and 28. So the best people to help us make sure we're hitting those marks are the people of that age group. So here are our subject matter experts. I'll allow them to introduce themselves first.
Aloha kako. My name is Meleana. I'm a senior at Kamehameha, 18 years old, and if my voice is shaky, it's because I'm shivering. It's cold in here, so I'm not nervous. You guys aren't that scary.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Lucy Lee. I'm also a senior at Kamehameha Schools. Meleana actually helped me get on board with this, but this issue is really prevalent on my heart. Recently, I had a close friend lose her brother to a drunk driver accident. I've also lost multiple family members and just multiple friends of my own. And I think that it's really scary because I'm only 17 and I've already had multiple occasions of this in my life. So that's what inspired me to speak today.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Daria Parkinson, and I am a student at Hawaii Pacific University. And I wanted to volunteer because I'm very passionate about this matter.
Aloha, guys. I'm Sophia Aguirre. I am a senior at Hawaii Pacific University. I also am interning for MADD this year, and I'm really passionate about this subject.
So we've talked this morning about the millennial audience, and there's a lot of data about how to reach and engage the millennial audience. But interestingly enough, this is not the millennial audience. This audience is considered Generation Z. And the reason why it's important to differentiate between them is because they grew up in a very different world. So their attitudes and behaviors differ slightly and influence the way that they engage with anything in their external environment. So Gen Z grew up in a tech-centric world. They have spent almost their entire lives online. They almost never leave voicemails. They prefer text over email. And they also use social platforms to do their direct messaging with their friends. They also have always had instant gratification at their fingertips via their devices, which means that they're able to get their options and also their research immediately, which is one of the reasons why it is so necessary that when we speak to this audience, we are authentic, because it's very easy for them to choose somebody else or find out where there might be flaws in your message. They are benefits driven, which means that you have to take a highly customized messaging approach in order to reach them and help them understand how it's going to help with achievement, success, and provide the what's in it for them. And because they grew up with all of this entertainment and access around them, the starting point is entertainment and experience. So you have to be able to provide them one of those things and know that that's what they need before they even tell you. So all of this makes for a very complex marketing environment. And one of the things that we heard in our opening panel this morning I thought was very spot on, which is it's actually about message education. And what we talk about together is that it has everything to do with brand engagement. So that's why I want to start today's conversation. Rather than looking at reaching and engaging you through marketing and advertising, let's talk about the concept of brand engagement. How is it that advertising reaches you guys now?
So advertisement reaches us through social media, through our smartphones, videos, Instagram and Facebook, and definitely with ads especially with music. A lot of people listen to Pandora or Spotify, and a lot of ads pop up then, so we can also implement our message through there.
I agree. Also, from the high school perspective, I would say we don't really have Facebook as our parents do, but Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube is another thing because we're always on YouTube, and that's the only time we get advertisements because we pay the extra money to have unlimited Spotify, so we don't have to hear advertisements. So it's really hard to get the word out, but I would say places that are mandatory for us to be in, which is our essentials of YouTube and Instagram, that's where I see advertisements.
Does any of that surprise you guys? I mean, really, the instances of Facebook usage in this demographic are so much lower than anybody anticipated. A lot of millennials are still using Facebook, but for Gen Z, no, Instagram is really the place to go. So how does advertising to you today differ than the advertising you saw when you were children?
When we were younger, we saw it on TV, right? We grew up watching TV after dinner or like during dinner, and now it's like we don't see that. We don't watch TV. We don't pay the money to have cable. So the difference is we don't see it as often unless you hear it from a friend or you see it pop up on YouTube. Wow, we sound a little snobby that we don't watch TV, but you get the point.
I can definitely recall, many of you are parents, I'm sure you can relate to this, seeing the toy commercials on Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network and your child instantly wanting that toy for just 4 installments of $19.95. I think the way that I differentiate personally now is I don't even watch the advertisement. Like, if I'm on YouTube and there's like a 15-second unskippable ad, I'll go on my phone and look at something else until the ad is over. So I don't think it's necessarily that the ads aren't there. I think it's not catching our attention. It's not something I care about. But like once in a while, I get those ads that are 2 minutes, but they're pretty interesting. So even though I can press that skip ad, I keep watching. So I think the thing that we have to, or a balance you need to find is, what's my hook that's gonna make them wanna finish this ad instead of pressing skip ad after that 10 seconds is over?
Can you share from your perspective what it was that you found to be so engaging about the spots that we saw from New Mexico this morning? And in addition to that, great pieces of content, but where would you actually watch that content?
For Michael Sandoval, when you spoke today, both your ending videos were very inspirational, and I thought we would really pay attention to those, especially the one with the kid, and that was very good. But we would watch it on TV, yet we don't have cable, so like unless it's advertised on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, those are the ways we would watch that video.
I feel like our generation is very emotionally driven. So personally, that's something that caught my eye, was how heavy it weighs on your emotions. I think that, I think that YouTube is definitely like one of the most effective, just because, like I was saying, if an ad does catch my attention, like I'll watch the entire ad because it's something I want to see the end of. And so, like, I think the hook of the entire thing was, the hook of the commercials that we watched this morning were very good, and it was very interactive. And I think there was in a scary way, there was a relatable portion to it. It's an experience that you've either seen or heard or just been a part of. And so I think that's something that should be played into.
So I do agree with her. Our generation needs ethos. You need to appeal to our ethics, things that we're visual as well. So if you're throwing logic out there, I'm not going to catch it. Like, it sounds really snobby, but if you get my eye in the 3 seconds that you have for me to look something over, if you don't get that, we're gone, we're out of here, we're skipping. But if you show right off the bat, like, emotion, we're here, we're all for it, we'll watch the ad. Like those commercials, it's out of the box. You see car crash commercials all the time, but then when it spilled into the pills, I was like, wow, this is something else that we haven't seen. And there's so many advertisements, you have to think outside of the box, or maybe in the box, but in a different way.
So let's talk about the role of influencers. I'm gonna set the stage by saying, for decades and decades and decades, those of us in the advertising and marketing world have spent our money on commercials. Because of the way this generation consumes their content, spending money on commercials is not going to be, for the placement, not the development, for the placement of commercials, is not going to be as effective at buying ad space as it is if you were to, for example, pay influencers. So tell us about who has the greatest influence over your interest in new things and how they build your trust.
First off, let's explain what influencers are. So you see on Instagram, people post things, and for us, when we see like a big name like Beyonce and she starts a new trend, then people are here, they're like looking around and seeing that. And that's what an influencer is, someone that sets the trend through social media. So, yeah.
I would like to add to that public figures, so these can be your friends as well within the community. They're also influencers, and we follow, and we also will like their pictures and maybe follow what they're doing or what they're advertising.
Mm-hmm. I think a really important point that Anthony mentioned earlier this morning was you can't have an influencer who's negatively talking down to your audience. Personally, if someone came up to me and I was someone who was participating in the use of illegal or illicit drugs, or if I was underage drinking and someone came to me and pretty much told me down, I would not listen to them. So I think that's a really big thing to take into consideration, is the not condoning the activities that are taking place. I'm not in support of any of those things, as you can tell that I'm working with MADD, but the difference between reaching out and having a genuine caring and having a genuine like desire to change and just someone scolding, influencers it has to be someone that they can relate to, but that the influencer can also relate to them. So I think like Anthony mentioned, just like people who have been there, people who have lived through this experience, maybe not even themselves personally, but people who have been surrounded by those types of people. I think that's something to look into, just people who have genuinely been in the situation and who aren't scolding and who aren't scolding but also aren't condoning the actions.
So when we talk about influencers, we're talking about anybody who has a following of north of 20,000 followers. It doesn't have to be somebody like Beyonce who may have 100+ million followers, but north of 20,000 followers. And for you guys, you actually go to school with a lot of people who are considered influencers. So it's not as difficult to find those influencers as you might think. And when you do identify your influencers get paid to talk about the products and the services and the activities that they care about. They do so with authenticity. It has to match everything else in their brand and on their page. And there's a formula for what you pay for an influencer. You pay based on their reach, and it varies in industry, but I've heard roughly $1,000 per 10,000 followers. But in younger ages, sometimes you get paid $100 to $400 for an appearance. So let's talk about events and appearances. You guys had shared with us that when you get an influencer to share about something new, one great way to do it is with an organic appearance at an event. So what does that look like, and what happens when they show up at one of those things that grabs your attention and makes you follow what it is they're doing?
For example, if a well-known public figure appeared in assembly for students and high school students will possibly look up to them like, wow, Beyonce, she does this. She is such a great influencer that people will want to follow her steps. And whatever she mentions to these students, like, hey, do not drug and drive, like aware students of, awareing the individuals about drugging and driving. Other people will be, or the students will be influenced to not to do that, not to do so. Because at a young age of 16 to 20-year-olds, they're more susceptible to drugs, especially because it's the experimenting stage. So you want to aim for that target population.
So one of the things that we discussed is finding who your early adopters are. And right now you're looking at our early adopters for this campaign. Every one of these women had a personal desire to be a part of this change. And by finding who these individuals who have cause-driven, a cause is close to their heart and they want to volunteer their time, these people can help you identify who the influencers are for the behavior that you're trying to inspire. They can also help you figure out where the target demographic is going to be spending their time as far as events are concerned. So if you begin by getting an influencer to come to an event, whether you pay them or they do it because it's a cause that they care about, and I remind you that, because we're not paying for ad spots on television, investing money in influencers is actually a viable and smart strategy these days. That when you have the influencer show up at an event, taking a photo of themselves at the event is one way to get this kicked off. So people start to recognize that this is a cause that draws attention. Following that initial event appearance, having influencers post on their social media feeds more curated content will build on what was initially an engagement at an event. And so that's how you're building awareness to get to the point where you have daily brand engagement via social media feeds with your target demographic. So let's talk about the visual identity. One of the things that you guys said was so critical is how you grab attention once you've gone from that place of having influencers who've captured your attention and now are trying to repetitively engage you on your social feeds. Tell us about the importance of using visuals versus using copy.
Personally, well, actually not personally because I love words, but I know many people who I do. I read the newspaper every day. I'm such a dork. But many people, if there's words, they won't read it. It's too time consuming. We already, like, the mentality of many people is I already read in school. Why do I need to read outside of school? So I think the thing about social media is it doesn't feel like you're doing any work. Like, even though your brain is still processing all the information and like your receptors and your synapses are still firing, there's still connections being made. The idea of it not being hard is very appealing to our generation, because after a long day, you don't want to go on Instagram and I'll scroll through Instagram and I'll see my friend's long caption and I'll be like, ooh, how much do I care about reading this? Usually not that much. So I think having a visual impact is so important, because if I see something and I'm like, holy cow, is this what I'm looking at? I'll screenshot it and send it to like 5 of my friends. Or I'll be like, oh my God, like, you have to see this. Did you see this person's post? If it's visually shocking and it creates this, like, I need to tell someone, I need to show this to someone. If it creates that wow effect, I think that's another way that you can definitely reach across to a larger demographic.
Meliana, you had shared something in a preparation call about some of the things that you think would be shocking and attention grabbing for a campaign like this. Would you share that with the rest of the audience?
So we're on Instagram to see visuals rather than Facebook is like kind of similar to Twitter, where there's just captions and you read. We're on Instagram because we want to see pictures. And if you're scrolling, you kind of see the common theme of we're in Hawaii, people are posting bikini pictures or sunset, my food was great. And if I'm scrolling down and I see a MADD post and it's about drugs and I see drugs off the bat, I'm going to be like, okay, wait, who am I following? Like, I need to kind of censor what I'm looking at. And if I see that right off the bat, I'm going to be like, okay, maybe this is something I actually have to check out. Like, who am I following? And if I see this MADD, drive high, get a DUI, then I'm like, oh, wow, you grabbed my attention with drugs, which is, in a bad way, it sounds bad, but you still caught my eye and I'm here to see it.
So drugs in the visual is what's going to grab your attention and hold it long enough for you to read what the copy says.
Right. It's like if you see everybody dressed in regular clothes and then you see someone walking around with like a fat pakalolo on their shirt, you're going to be like, okay, but he got your eye, right? And it was through drugs, but he still grabbed your attention.
Daria, you had shared as a contrast, in addition to shocking images, there's another way to really grab attention and focus it on a cause.
I think I mentioned food. Everyone loves food. So I was thinking, if you see something on Instagram and these beautiful sprinkled donuts, you're like, oh, wow, donuts. And you click on that and you see a video play, and there you see a person grab a donut, take it out, eat it, but you see that their eyes are red and they're going and taking their keys and going on a car ride. And that is like, oh, don't drive high. And, it's just like it's something that grabs people's attention is food. Or we were actually, me and Sophia go to school with a fellow student, and we asked him, what grabs your attention? If you pick up your phone and you scroll through Instagram, what grabs your attention? So he was like, food, items like fancy cars, and just well-known public figures, just to get the word out. It just grabs your attention.
I also want to mention earlier speech today from Captain Tyson. He showed a video of it being funny, showing portraying the message as funny, but still getting the message out there. I feel like that was also a good idea because people like funny stuff. So yeah, that's what I would think.
Can any of you speak to the role of fashion in grabbing somebody's attention and driving it towards a cause?
Fashion as in different brands of clothing, or like sunglasses, The one how we mentioned sunglasses. Okay. So we were trying to grab people's attention, not maybe in like a negative way, but more in just an attractive way. So MADD is like a red color. So someone picking up a water bottle and drinking it and saying, "Wow, I support MADD," or someone with red sunglasses putting them on, enjoying the sun in Hawaii, saying, "I support MADD."
So the theme here is that because people are using their social media as a form of self-expression, if you can identify your product with something like a color, like red, you may be able to get multiple people engaging because they care about the cause, but are using something that you've given them, like a color or an article of clothing, as a way to express themselves to their audience.
I can't remember the brand, but I know we have to take a class called Personal Health to graduate. And I remember they came and would give their presentation, and at the end they would have a game of some sort. And the prize was like sunglasses with a hashtag on it. I want to say it was, what is that? I'm not sure what the brand was, but like things similar to that, where like you're giving out merchandise that spreads your message, and then you encourage kids to post it on their social media. So I can remember after that going on Instagram or Snapchat, and there was like 20 Snapchats of everyone showing their glasses. So I think that's super effective. Just the idea of a hashtag actually is pretty effective, but yeah.
And another thing that they spoke about is how to get larger and larger peer groups engaged. After you've done these individual things that start to introduce your brand with authenticity via people who they follow and trust, your early adopters are going to help you find the larger groups within their peers who can become ambassadors. And a lot of people will do that as a way to build their resume. So when you're looking, would anybody speak to some of that about the groups that have expressed interest in participating because it was an opportunity through their education?
Not just education, but I have a lot of friends that are running for Miss Hawaii, and a lot of people who are just doing a lot of volunteer work because they're going to go into healthcare, or it'll help them with their resume. So they're also very passionate about helping the community. So they're engaged in more than just MADD, but like a lot of other organizations. So these are the people that will be willing to help and be a volunteer and an ambassador.
So we all know how expensive, ridiculously expensive college is. And all these kids are trying to get scholarships or find different ways to make money for college. So resumes, and they need a lot of hours of community service or things to put on their resume for college. And being an ambassador, that sets them apart from all other people. So that's why I think like going into high school, transitioning into getting into college, and those kids are really, I wouldn't say vulnerable, but you can attack those children because they're the easiest to pull in and get them towards your cause or towards MADD.
Building off of that, like we mentioned earlier, our generation is very, how does this serve me? What does this do for me? What am I getting out of this? I can recall so many times I volunteered through various organizations, and I'll be volunteering with my friends, and they'll look at me and say, dude, I better be getting like volunteer hours, or this better be community service. And I look at them and I'm like, oh, but like, don't you enjoy this? They're like, yeah, but I need the community service hours. So I think definitely like playing to that side of you don't necessarily need like the monetary or you get this like a tangible item, but being able to have something on their resume and have something that sets, like Meliana said, that sets us apart. Another thing that I would recommend once you do get these ambassadors of some sort would be to build a personal relationship with them. I've worked with lots of organizations, and I think the ones that I keep going back to are the ones who made me feel appreciated and made me feel like I was more than just like someone helping their cause. Yeah.
So we prepared to talk about the communications aspect with all of you, because as we take the action plan away from today, we're going to be looking at how to effectively get the message out to this target demographic. But as I look at the questions that are being submitted via Slido, I noticed that there are a lot of questions about behavior. So I'd like to ask you guys some questions that came in from the audience. The first one is, how has drugs affected the private school sector? What education is available to address these substance abuse issues?
So I got into Kamehameha my 7th grade year. Personally, as we've gotten older, I mean, I've definitely seen an increase, not so much like on campus, just like, you know, I follow people on social media and I'll see what they're doing on the weekends. But I think it's kind of an avoided topic. I don't know if Meliana agrees with me, but I feel like there's such a heavy separation between what happens in school and what happens in our personal lives. There's a joke, don't get caught in your uniform, pretty much vouching to the idea that once we take off our polo shirts and our mill shorts, we are no longer Kamehameha students. I think that it is a conversation that needs to be had in schools, not only public schools, but also private schools. I'm going to be blatantly honest and say private school kids have the money, have the access, have the ability. They have the houses to throw parties. They have pretty much unlimited access to everything that is a parent's worst nightmare. So I think the conversation of you as a person is really important. I believe there's a very heavy separation between you as a student and you as a person, where there shouldn't necessarily be one. Yeah.
So unlike Lucy, I got in high school, so drugs, like the use of drugs start at a young age in Hawaii, I would say, besides the statistics, just because people have older cousins, aunties, uncles that are willing to give them the drugs. So I saw it at a public school, and I also see it at a private school. And the difference was, public school, there's drugs everywhere. There's drugs at either school you go to. It doesn't really matter. It's just, as she said, the resources. When I was going to public school, I was like, oh, it's so expensive. No, I'm not going to do this. Like, I can wait. But now that I'm at private school, you can see that people are like, oh, well, we have the house. We're going to throw the party. You bring the stuff. And people, it's the resources that they have, the money. It's totally different from public school, because even though drugs is still going to be there, it's definitely the resources.
Taria, Sophia, do you have anything to add about that from the college campus perspective?
I agree with them about how being in a private school, there are a lot of more wealthier students. So yeah, with the homes, they do, have a lot of substance abuse going on. And also, I don't know, in private schools like Hawaii Pacific University, we're actually taught about all the substance abuse and drugs, and we're introduced to this fact.
But it depends on the major you're in. So
Right.
maybe educational programs for every major, not just public health or like anyone in
Psychology.
healthcare. It could be everywhere. That would be very helpful for everyone, because right now it's just offered, I think, for public health. And then like any of these students that would need something to graduate, like the credits to graduate, and then they would want to take that course.
Sorry, can I just add something? I think that the conversation needs to start in middle school. DARE was a great program, and I totally understand that introducing it that young definitely made people curious. But the conversation, like, I can't stress to you how much this needs to happen in middle school. I didn't have that at public school, and I'm not mocking anybody or DOE at all. I had the conversation about meth, like you hear those kind of stuff, like that sticks with you as a kid or as a middle schooler. You hear like these people that come and they share their testimony. I still remember that. I still remember the lady. I still remember everything she went through. But you don't have that stuff in high school, and it should happen in high school, but I'm saying high school, it's too late. People, they're jaded. They're stuck in their mindset of, oh, I'm old. I mean, we were all once teenagers. You know how hard-headed you were. This needs to happen in middle school, 7th grade. It's not too early because, well, here in Hawaii, from my experience, you can tell that people started in 6th grade, and it's sad, but it's true, and this conversation needs to happen before high school.
To tack onto that, I also believe that it also needs to be a conversation. So many things begin in the household. Everything begins in the household, and I think it's kind of a taboo subject. It's something parents don't want to talk about. They're uncomfortable talking about. So I think that's another thing to look into is how can I engage like parents in this? How can I have them start this conversation? I mean, it's similar to all uncomfortable conversations. The birds and the bees, no one wants to have that conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. Like was mentioned earlier, it's gonna happen. Abstinence. It's a fantasy world. We know things are gonna happen. So I think you need to have the conversation early, and you also need to have the conversation about just being smart and making good decisions, because like with sex, like ultimately if a teenager decides to have sex, would you rather them like not know anything about it and do it completely with no protection? So I think that aligns and it's parallel in that way. I'm not saying that they're equal issues, but just the conversation needs to be had, and it's something that I feel like parents shy away from because it's uncomfortable, or they don't want their kids thinking they were a stoner in high school, or I mean the reasons vary, but I definitely believe that it's a conversation that needs to be had within the household, and giving parents an outlet to start that conversation is something that I definitely believe should be looked into.
That's definitely true that being a MADD or being a school, that it opens up for parents to have that conversation, just because, you know, not everyone's raised the same, even though we're all raised in Hawaii, or we are. Not every household's the same. Not all parents are going to talk about that. Like she said, it's a taboo subject, and you know, in Hawaii, people don't really like to talk about things like that just because it is taboo. But having this, like having a MADD or DARE program, stuff like that, sorry, these are just examples, but them coming in and starting that conversation, and that teenager going back to their parents and asking them about it, that opens the door. And we put a footstep so that the parents can finish through, and if they do or if they don't, but it still opened the door for the child to know the real life of drugs and what MADD is here for them. So, yeah.
I'd like to ask a question about, so you say house parties are a place where a lot of this is happening now. What is the barrier to people taking Lyft or Uber, for example, so that after a house party where they're engaging in these activities, they're not getting on the road and driving home?
We lie to our parents. Many people who go to parties probably don't tell their parents that they're going to parties. So them coming home in an Uber or a Lyft when their parents know they drove somewhere is suspicious. They don't have debit and credit cards. I mean, I can personally attest to I didn't have one until I was traveling, and that's the only reason I got one. Had I not traveled, I probably would still pay for everything with cash. So there's that. The safety behind it, I think that maybe not so much in Hawaii, but I know definitely while I was on the mainland, my mom kind of told me, she was like, stay away from taxis, stay away from Lyfts, from Ubers, you never know who you're getting in the car with. And And then that whole mentality that was mentioned of I drive better stoned, I drive better under the influence. We know that's not true, but many people who do and participate in those activities seem to believe that it is true. And I think there's just a shame almost behind not being able to take care of yourself, not being able to drive, not being able to have that freedom to do what you want.
So what would deter you and your friends from impaired driving when the likelihood of getting caught right now is so low?
I think that's a really big issue, and to be honest, I don't have like an exact solution. But maybe it's also this culture of not so much shaming. I mean, it's, yes, underage drinking or smoking weed or doing drugs, definitely not acceptable. But as she said, it's gonna happen. Not saying that I do this, Mom, if you're watching this, because I definitely don't. But it's they're teenagers. I mean, could you say that you went through high school and didn't know anyone that didn't participate in an illegal activity? I don't think it's possible. So it's having a culture of, yes, you messed up, but we need you to be safe. We need the roads to be safe, not just for you, but for everybody else. And having a culture that accepts that, yes, you messed up, but we need to take you home. I mean, it's really like, there's no one solution, and it might just be the parents accepting that their kid did something bad and taking them home, being able to call your parents like, hey, Mom, you know, I totally did this thing that I shouldn't have done, but I need to get home safe. Also touching on Uber and Lyft, yes, there's a culture of not wanting to get in there like girls because of the true stories that happen that people are taken advantage of. But also college versus high school. High schoolers don't have the debit cards or the credit cards to pay for stuff like that. So people rely on their other friends and DDs, or sometimes they make that fatal mistake of driving themselves home so that their parents know that they're home and okay, but that's obviously not going to work.
Adding on to that, I think there just needs to be not enforced, but the culture of holding others and holding yourself accountable. If you're recently my friend's brother, they allowed him behind the wheel even though he was drunk. He crashed his car and we lost him a month ago. She has expressed to me not only her disappointment in her brother, because yes, he did make that choice, but also her disappointment in his friends. How are you gonna let someone you love, someone you call your brother, someone whose blood family, someone you trust, someone you care about, how are you gonna let them get in the car when you know that they're impaired? When I took driver's ed, I had a MADD representative come in and talk to our class, and he talked about an agreement he made with his son, similar to what Meliana was suggesting, about if he made an agreement with his son. If you are ever at a party or somewhere you shouldn't be, but you're intoxicated or you're under the influence, if you call me and I drive you home, I won't be mad. There will be no penalty. But if I find out that you got in that car and you drove yourself home, or you drove your friends home, you drove to someone else's house, there will be so many consequences. And I think that doesn't condone the action, but it also gives an outlet for you to get home safely. Another thing is in pertaining to DUI checkpoints, I know that there's I saw a tweet about it. I read sometimes. I saw a tweet that was like, people who tip off other drivers about DUI checkpoints are the worst drivers around. And because I just started driving, I just turned 17, so I started driving maybe half a year ago. I mean, it's not something you learn in driver's ed, like, oh, if they blink their lights 3 times, that means that there's a DUI checkpoint up there. But just the culture of, I mean, I'm sure it happens in other states, but I know it happens a lot in Hawaii. The tipping off of police officers, I think that, like, it definitely makes it harder because while there are checkpoints in place, if you see that, you're going to go a different route. You're going to go home a different way and completely avoid the checkpoint altogether. And so I think just the culture of holding each other accountable and holding yourself accountable is something that should be, that it needs to happen, and it needs to be a conversation that is had between peers and adults and children. But I definitely feel like you get the most influence from peer to peer. If I was to talk to my friend about it, I'd probably have a much better conversation than if his or her mom was trying to sit him or her down and say, let's talk about this. So I definitely think that the peer-to-peer interaction is something that should be touched upon heavily.
Why do people of your generation use drugs? She said, beats me.
Possibly to cope with whatever they're dealing at home or with peer pressure, to numb the pain.
Social gatherings, parties, if it's there, they'll do it.
I think there's this stigma behind the idea of drinking and drug use being part of the high school and college experience. Especially in college, like, I can definitely attest to lots of my friends saying, like, I'm going to go to UNLV, it's a party school. Like, that's the intent that they're going to college with. And I'm kind of like, okay, you're going to pay a lot of money to go to parties, okay. But no, and I think it's something like just the experimental, as a probably 15 through 18-year-olds, you have very little control of things that are happening in your life. You go to school because you have to go to school. You potentially get a job because you have to get a job. You play sports because your parents said so. Like, everything is routine and everything is according to someone else. And so I think that maybe drugs and drinking is something that they can turn to that is completely themselves. It's a decision they're making for themselves. It's something they want to do, something. And oftentimes I feel like it would be in secret. I'm not sure, but I feel like it would be something, it was like their little secret that their parents don't know about. And it's something that fulfills that rebel inside of them or that hard-headedness inside of them that just wants to go off and completely do their own thing on a separate tangent.
Are there skills that can be taught to discourage people from this kind of behavior?
I wouldn't say it's skills, it's a cultural thing. Like, I think people can agree that it's culturally accepted here in Hawaii to smoke weed because it's like, oh, it's pakalolo, let's get lolo. Like, you know, it's a thing that comes from your older cousins doing it. So, oh, we're going to do it. And then we get our little cousins to do it. And it's more of a, it needs to be a culturally accepted thing that it shouldn't happen. Like, when we think of drinking, you don't think of drinking and driving for, I think, our generation, because it's like, oh, well, do you know how much people have died from this? Like, are you dumb? Why would you do that? That's kind of a peer-to-peer conversation that you have with someone. But when it comes to drugs, it's like, oh, that whole mentality of, oh, I drive better, I'm more awake, I'm ready to drive. It needs to happen where, I wouldn't say it's more of a, if you don't condone it or if you shame people for doing it, yes, the rebellion soul is going to be there, but also that gets in their head like, oh, people die. That's not something I want to be a part of. I don't want to hurt anybody else. And I don't think people or teenagers do drugs to like, oh, I'm going to kill myself. Like, no, that's not why they do it. They do it to be rebellious, and if they get in that car and they hurt somebody else, then a light bulb clicks in their head and they realize, like, I have a family, I wouldn't hurt my family, so I wouldn't hurt another person's family. So it's definitely a culture of shaming in a way, because drinking and driving, it's what you say to your friend, like, don't do that, like, come on, think with your head.
We have just enough time for a few more communication questions. The first one is, do you pay attention to ads shown before feature movies in the theaters?
I do sometimes, but it depends what if I'm really focusing on the movie at the moment and I'm just watching everything else that's like before the movie, sometimes I will, and then other times I'll just be on my phone waiting for the movie to begin. So it really depends. It has to catch my attention.
I am the person that walks in 5 minutes after the movie started with my kakimochi, large popcorn, and icy. I feel like, especially now that we have things such as like Fandango and like you can order your tickets online, you can buy your seats online, there's not the rush to, I need to be at the movie theater 15 minutes before the show starts so I can buy everything and get in. I think it's a more leisurely thing now. So I feel like the ads before the movies are good for people who show up on time to things. I can tell you that is not my generation. I think that'd be probably more towards like millennials and older. So if you're looking to target Gen Z, I definitely don't think that would be effective because getting in the car 3 minutes after the movie started, yelling at my friends to lock the door as I'm starting the car to get to the movie theater. Yeah.
How many movies have you guys seen in the theater this year?
One.
A Black Panther, and I mean, realistically, movie theaters, and they're so expensive to go to, and it's like, why would I spend $20 when I can go watch it illegally online? But I'm the Storm Thumb, so I'm gonna somewhat disagree, but I do agree with them. But you want a TV ad or do you want a movie ad? I would personally watch the movie ad because I show up on time. Wink, wink. No, I don't. But I watch the movie ads if there's something. I mean, that's a place that's mandatory. Like I paid to be here. I'm gonna get my money's worth. Believe me that. Like I'm gonna watch the ads that are coming up as long as it's not the same old. Weird, like movies after movies. If it's something different, I think you're gonna get somebody's attention, especially something like MADD or Driving High, stuff like that. I think it'd grab my attention.
Who are some of the local influencers that you follow?
I follow Anuea. I actually used to work at Blue Note. It was a jazz club, and I actually got to meet her. And I was just inspired by her music, and I follow her on Instagram and love all of her pictures.
I feel like I follow mainly funny people. I think that, I think the people that have the most prevalence would probably be music artists in Hawaii. Like we all know Josh Tatofi, Kamehameha, Anuhea. So I would think it'd be probably around those people.
So yes, music artists, because there's so much music here. And also I think there's the joke you throw around, like, oh, Kid Brands, like, oh, send that to Kid Brands. Like the Kid Brands is, for people that don't know, he just posts funny videos throughout the islands. Like you see random videos on there, but it's like people that are doing random things in Hawaii, and that's something like we joke about it, but like you actually watch the stuff that you shouldn't watch on there. Like it's weird things, but if you put it out there and it's funny, we're gonna watch it.
Okay, last question, and I'd love it if each of you would give an answer. We'll start with you, Sophia, and work our way this direction. If there was one thing that you could say to your peers to get their attention on this topic, what would it be and why?
Honestly, for my peers to listen and actually get the message out there, it would have to be like an emotional thing. So maybe saying like, because a lot of people don't really know the statistics about drugging and driving, as well as they're not really aware of it. It's not something that you see commonly. You see a lot of drinking and driving and how that's bad, but you really don't see anything about drugs and driving. So maybe making them aware emotionally somehow. That's one way I would do, in hopes that they would listen.
Let me add one more thing. What would you say, why and where?
Where on Instagram? Why I would say because it's bad and we should be able to be helping our community be a better place altogether. So giving them statistics on why drugging and driving is bad, I would do that. And then what was the third one? Where? Oh, okay. Instagram.
So I would connect with my audience emotionally as well, and I would try to put the audience in the shoes of like say if I want to make a video of an individual driving with their little brother in the background and they're drunk or on drugs, high, and like that one video where the truck hits them. Like if I say that, I want to put that audience in their shoes. Like, what would you do if you were that little boy? You want to connect on that emotional level so you can get their attention. Like, wow, I don't want to do that to my little brother. I would place that on Instagram as well, even YouTube. What was that other question? Oh, I did that. Okay.
Yeah, what would you say, why would you say it, and where would you put it? Yeah.
Personally, I feel like I would have multiple face-to-face conversations with my friends if I was to initiate this conversation with them. Like I said, if I were to send them a fat paragraph explaining how I feel about this topic, they'd probably skim through it and reply in an hour and be like, oh man, that's rough. And like, I feel like it's a conversation that needs to be had in person. Like, we've shared the whole emotional aspect of it. Like, I can be emotional and they can sense my emotional tone through words or through an Instagram post. But I feel like if they were to feel my genuine emotion as I'm speaking to them, that would impact them in a greater way than me just sending them this long list of facts and stats about drugged driving and drunk driving. I believe strongly that personal stories have the greatest impact. In 2016, what year was it? 2016. Many of you probably know the story. Kaulana Warner was killed in a drunk driving accident, and that was something that resonated heavily with our high school personally. He was one of our star football players. He was a Kamehameha graduate, all-around good guy, typical person from the West Side, just friendly and warm and welcoming. And so I think that definitely struck a chord because it was someone we knew. Even deeper than that, our grade went through it a lot personally because his younger brother was actually our classmate. So, I mean, definitely I believe that people still think about that today if they were to get in a car, because there are parties, there are instances in which people do drugs and they drink, but I definitely think that just the idea of him in the back of their mind is still there, and it's still something that's prevalent and heavy on their heart, especially because our classmate was so deeply and heavily affected. So I think that personal stories are definitely the most effective way, and it also gives the sense of it's not something you're going to make up. No one's going to come forward with this heart-wrenching story just for the heck of it. Like, no, that's not something that people do. And so I think that just makes it so much more real. And it's not just a forced content message. It's not those cheesy commercials that you see where they're just trying to get their message across. And it's obvious that they don't genuinely care and they don't genuinely have that connection, that they're just trying to get their job done. And so I think that's why personal stories in person is how I would do it.
So besides commercials, I think one place you can put it is, when you're driving H3 or like different highways and you see those signs that it says like, oh, lane closed. You put something on there, like I don't know if anybody saw this, but Department of Transportation put one about driving Lolo or something like that. I mean, we know about it, and like I don't even drive on that side of the island, but putting something in Pigeon is something that's like, okay, did DOT really do that? And then you have to go drive and you're like looking like, oh, they actually did do that, like wow. But you had our attention, and we don't even drive on that side of the island. It's like you have to put something like drive high, stuff like that. Say you have to put it in Pigeon because you need to know your audience, and our audience is Hawaii. You can't just use we would like you to not drive like this. That's not how it works. You have to know your audience, and it has to be something that they can relate to, and then they can also laugh because, I mean, it isn't a funny subject, but if you can make the most out of it, right there, you have people paying attention. But besides that, or highway signs, it's visuals, so videos, commercials, the least logic as possible. You can throw facts up there because nobody likes to watch the commercial, and then at the end of the commercial you hear all the side effects from the medicine. You hear da-da-da-da-da, like, oh, you can get diarrhea, you can get this, and it's like, why do I need to know that on TV? Like, I'll talk to my doctor if that's what's happening, but you hear logic like that and you're like, hold up, I don't want to hear this. You want to see the emotion, the ethos. You need to appeal to ethos and not logos, not logic. Or pathos, yeah, sorry. Something I learned in English. But another thing is personal stories. Like she said, our school went through so much when we found that out about Kalena, and because his brother was still at our school, it's something that you think about, and when you get into a car with someone like that, you're like, wait, this is real. This isn't just a statistic that you heard in class or in personal health or something you hear about happening in the mainland. Though our traffic incidents or accidents aren't the same as the mainland, you hear one story and you hear the family and you're like, wow, like this is different. This is real. So having like a commercial that it hears from the mother's perspective or the father's, like how this first speaker brought that up, it's right off the bat gets the kids' attention. When I was in elementary going to middle school, a middle schooler actually, she got in the car with her friend's dad, and she ended up passing away because they got in a car accident on the pulley, and her parents came and they talked at school, and it was heartbreaking. You had the whole school in tears, and yet they learned a simple truth that driving under the influence of anything can actually result in death, and it's not just that mentality of, oh, I'll be fine. Like, no, this is real. And hearing that from not just statistics, but hearing from the mom, it was just like, I would never want my mom to be in that situation, and I connected right away, even though I haven't been in that situation.
Just adding on one more thing before we close out. I think another thing that isn't as focused on is the family of the drunk driver. So like I mentioned, my friend's brother was actually the one who was driving under the influence. But not even necessarily those who result in fatality, but just like how driving drunk affected a family, because it's one thing to be the family who gets that call of your child was killed in this incident, but it's another heaviness on the heart to hear your child was the one who caused this. And I think that's another thing, right? You don't want your parents to be the ones getting that 4:00 phone call that you're at the medical office and they need to come identify your body, but you also don't want your parents to get that call that you're sitting in prison because you were drinking and you were driving. Personally, my mom has always said, if I get that call, I'm not coming to pick you up. She's like, I'm not condoning that. I'm not supporting that at all. Like, it's a terrible thing. And I laughed because, it's my mom. But then I think about it, like the reality of it, and like the people who were driving drunk, like in a way, their life is over. Like, it didn't end in fatality, but that goes on their permanent record. They have jail time. They have, like, I've heard stories of those, like, not being able to get jobs because of, like, things that this has happened, or just their families shunning them, their families refusing to talk to them just because of the shame and the hurt. And so that's another thing that I feel should be focused on, because the story of the victim it hits hard, but the story of the people who have to live with the pain after is definitely a whole nother story.
Well, I want to thank all four of you for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you so much, Sophia, Daria, Lucy, and Meliana, and all of you for your great questions. I know there were some we didn't get to, but there will be breakout sessions after this. So thank you again. And by a show of hands, we've got 2 rooms for our action planning session, and they're different sizes. So we wanted to gauge how many people were inclined to go one or the other. So by a show of hands, who's planning to go to the planning session on law enforcement and courts? Okay, thank you. And then who's planning to go to the session on communication and education? Okay. Does that give us, yeah? Okay. All right. All right. Thank you again. It's been a real honor, and we'll talk to you again soon.
And I think I'm sure I expressed the thanks from all of us in the room, and you have given us so much information and such a different way of looking at things, and I can't tell you how much impact what you have said will help us in going forward with our planning on this campaign about drugs and driving, and even helping our existing campaign on drinking and driving. Thank you for being here. I know that not every student would do this. You're an exceptional group, and we just really, really thank you from our hearts.